have something you have been managing for a long time, an impulse, a desire, a quality in yourself that you decided was unacceptable and have been disciplining ever since. Friedrich Nietzsche had a specific name for what happens to the will when it turns against itself. Not discipline, not mastery. The transformation of the person into the shape of their own resistance. The fight has lasted longer than the thing you were fighting. The original impulse, the thing the fight was designed to contain, has been managed, suppressed, redirected. But the structure of the fight remains. It has organized your energy, your identity, your relationship to yourself, for so long that it has become more defining than anything it was designed to suppress. The question Nietzsche spent his career on is not whether the fight was worth having. It is what you have become in the course of having it. Nietzsche's concept of the will to power is most commonly misunderstood as a drive for dominance over others. His actual framework is more precise and more uncomfortable. The will to power is the fundamental drive toward self-expression, the movement of life toward the full expression of what it contains. The most interesting question for Nietzsche was not what happens when the will encounters external resistance. It was what happens when the will turns against itself, when the drive toward self-expression is redirected inward, when the person decides that some part of what they are requires suppression, management, defeat, and applies the full force of their will to containing themselves. The result is not mastery. The result is a specific and well-documented transformation. The person becomes the fight, not what they were fighting, not what they were defending, the fight itself. The identity organizes around the resistance. The will, turned against the self, produces a self defined by its own opposition. Nietzsche documented this across his analysis of ascetic ideals. The person who denies, suppresses, and disciplines their own nature in the name of a higher standard. His observation was that the ascetic does not transcend the thing they are suppressing. They give it a new form. The suppressed desire does not disappear. It becomes the organizing principle of the life built to suppress it. I have worked on this. I have managed it. I am not the person who acts on that impulse anymore. The discipline is real. The change is real. Nietzsche's question is not whether the change is real. It is what the change has cost, and what the person looks like when the cost is added to the account. The most precise philosophical examination of how the will against itself operates is Nietzsche's analysis of the ascetic priest in On the Genealogy of Morality. The ascetic ideal takes the will, the drive toward expression, toward life, toward the full force of what a person contains, and inverts it. The will is not suppressed. It is redirected. Instead of moving outward toward expression, it moves inward toward suppression. And in this inversion, the will becomes stronger, not weaker. The ascetic is not a person with a weak will. The ascetic is a person with an extraordinarily strong will that has been turned entirely against the self. The result is not peace. It is a permanent state of internal war, maintained with great discipline, producing an identity structured entirely around what is being held back. This is Nietzsche's most important observation about internal conflict. The fight against the self does not weaken the self. It reorganizes it entirely around the terms of the fight. The second pattern is the one visible in the research on suppression. Psychological studies on thought and impulse suppression consistently produce the same finding. The deliberate suppression of a thought or impulse increases its frequency and intensity. The person who decides not to think about something thinks about it more, not less. The person who decides not to feel something feels it with more force, not less. The suppression does not reduce the thing suppressed. It gives it the entire structure of the person's attention as its container. I am aware of it. I know it is there. I have built a life that does not give it room to operate. That awareness is the management. That is what discipline looks like from the inside. Nietzsche's framework says the awareness is the evidence of how completely the thing has taken up residence. The managed impulse occupies more space than the expressed one, because it requires the continuous presence of the person to keep it managed. The third pattern is the one with no distance. Think about the quality in yourself that you have been most disciplined about containing. The one you identified early, before you had the language for it, as something that needed to be managed rather than expressed. And consider how much of your identity has been built in response to that quality rather than independent of it. My patience, my self-control, my reliability, my steadiness, all of it organized around not being the thing I decided I would not be. The virtues you are most certain of are the virtues you constructed in direct response to the thing you fight, which means the thing you fight is more present in who you are than anything you have chosen freely. Think about the version of yourself that the fight has produced, not the version you were before the fight began. The version that exists now, shaped by years of managing, containing, disciplining the specific thing you decided was unacceptable. The patience you developed because of the impatience. The control you developed because of the loss of control. The steadiness you developed because of the volatility. All of it real. All of it constructed in direct response to the thing you were fighting. Who are you without the fight? Not who were you before it. Who are you now if the fight were removed? If the thing you have been containing were no longer requiring containment, if the vigilance were no longer necessary, what would remain of the identity built around it? I don't know. The discipline is so woven into how I function that I can't separate it from the thing it was responding to. I built myself in opposition to something, remove the opposition, and I'm not sure what's left. That uncertainty is not a problem to be solved. It is the most accurate description of what the fight has done. The will turned against itself long enough, produces a self that can no longer be separated from its own resistance. The fight did not defeat what you were fighting. It became you. The fight has lasted longer than the thing you were fighting, and the person who has been fighting is no longer distinct from what they were built to contain. He did not believe in surrender to the impulse. His framework is more demanding than either option. The will turned against itself cannot be resolved by reversing direction. The person who releases the contained impulse after years of suppression does not find freedom. They find the impulse amplified by everything that was used to contain it. Nietzsche's concept of self-overcoming requires something different: the examination of what the will has been doing, not whether the fight was right, what the fight produced, what identity was constructed around it, and whether that identity is the identity the person would have chosen if they had been choosing freely. The will to power, when it operates against the self, does not produce weakness. It produces a very specific form of strength, the strength of the person who has learned to contain, manage, and discipline their own nature with complete effectiveness. What Nietzsche observed is that this strength has a cost that is rarely examined. It is entirely dependent on the continued presence of the thing it was built to fight. Remove the enemy, and the structure loses its purpose. The fighter without a fight does not know who they are, because the fight was never a means to an end. It was the end. The identity was built for war, and war is the only condition in which it feels fully itself. This is not a diagnosis. It is the only accurate description of what happens when the will turns against itself for long enough. The fight becomes the form, and the person who has become their own resistance cannot know what they would have been without it. You became what you fight, not by losing, by winning so completely that the victory is indistinguishable from the defeat. And it is also about what you attract. Jung documented something specific about the relationship between what a person resists in themselves and what keeps arriving in their life from the outside. The pattern is not coincidence. It is the mechanism of the shadow operating in the domain of relationship and circumstance. What you suppress most completely, or is what you attract most reliably. Why you attract what you resist. That is next.